Sovereign is the second book in an ongoing trilogy of superhero novels written by April Daniels. These stories were written as a gift to trans girls to start to fill the vacuum of stories written by trans authors with trans youth as the target audience. They are an affirmation and, as superhero stories, a power fantasy. While I myself am not trans and found the story through a recommendation by also not trans YouTuber Dominic Noble, I'm really enjoying them and find them deeply compelling. It's one of those books that just keeps creeping up on me how good it is. One of those incredibly compelling moments comes in the middle of book 2, when main character Danny Tozier meets supervillain Richard Garrison. He's literally a billionaire named Rich. I love it. Cosmetically, he couldn't be more different from the other supervillains of the story. Early on, in Danny's first fight of the book, John Crenshaw, the one-dimensional supervillain, rants and raves. "I have a lot of really important friends. We don't need to fight. You can understand, right? We're better than these people. Just let me go. Nobody important has been hurt, right?" It's very simple to spot evil when it's this obvious, but there's a reason this guy is out of the way by page 56 and dead by page 97. He's not the main villain. The real supervillain of this story, Richard Garrison, is charismatic, suave, articulate, and very much in control of himself. He has some similarities to John Crenshaw, like having important friends, but for our discussion, the important difference is that he seems like the kind of person that you could sit down and have a conversation with. You might even be tempted to, given free speech and the marketplace of ideas and all that. That right there is the reason I felt compelled to make this video. It's not that we need a practical guide for catching supervillains. Supervillains don't exist. But like monsters before them, supervillains are a manifestation of our anxieties. Commies, business owners, poor people, rich people, smart people, jealous people, the uncaring vast expanse of the cosmos. It kind of just depends on what the author is scared of, and April Daniels has some very well thought out anxieties about what happens when capitalism gets taken too far. I mean, her supervillain is a guy who wants to create a marketplace for biological traits and return the world to a feudal system. See, one can rant and rave like they're being evil for evil's sake, or they can be calm and collected and still have the same political goal. In fact, I would argue that the highly sophisticated supervillain is more effective in furthering their goals for the specific reason that they seem approachable. But Daniels' anxiety about this threat also seems to include a pessimism about people's ability to spot this kind of rhetoric for what it is. This is shown in Danny's inability to put her finger on what seems off about what he's saying until he literally says he wants to end democracy. Even then, she doesn't actually rebuff any of his points. She just starts hitting him. And for a superhero power fantasy, this is fun. But in the real world, it's optically and rhetorically advantageous to have counter-arguments when you come up against these talking points. And yes, this supervillain is so deeply rooted in the political and economic conversations of our time that you are likely to hear some of his talking points in the wild. For the rest of this video, we're going to go through the supervillain plot and point out the places where Danny, a literal child, mind you, didn't catch on to what was going on, and pose some options for talking points that you can use when having these conversations. So we'll start out with part 1, limiting resources. One of the overarching plot points of this story is that the total number of superheroes is increasing, and this concerns everyone. Why is it happening? How fast will it happen? What are the ramifications? Richard Garrison gives his point of view. "Our initial calculations were pessimistic by an order of magnitude," says Garrison. "We're not only able to pick who gets superpowers, we can even pick roughly what sort of powers they can get. Further refinements are on the way, but this is really just a means to an end. Ask yourself, what are the implications of being able to pick and choose?" One of the implications occurs to me immediately. "Is it limited?" I ask. "I'm not sure what you're asking." "Is it limited?" I ask again, pointing to the part of the infograph that represents the probability of what they're calling an empowering event occurring. The probability of someone somewhere in the world getting superpowers on a given day, is that a fixed number and you're just shifting who it happens to, or can you change the probability itself? And for the first time, something genuine breaks through Garrison's sales pitch. He's surprised, impressed, like, I guess he expected because I look like a blonde swimsuit model, I'd be an idiot or something. We can adjust the total curve, yes. In this passage, superpower is a resource, and importantly, it is not a finite resource. This is the most important piece of information in this whole conversation, so keep it in mind. I look back at him, excitement blooming in my chest. My smile isn't media-ready armor anymore, it's real and growing. We could give everyone in the world superpowers, and we could do it in a safe and controlled way. Garrison's smile falters a little bit, but, well, that would almost defeat the point, wouldn't it? I mean, what's the point of powers if they're common? In this statement, he explains why he wants to limit and control this resource. He wants to limit human potential because what he actually cares about is hierarchy. He believes that certain people should be on top, and listen, I'm not going to make the argument that all hierarchy is bad because I don't need to. All I need to do is point out that the hierarchy he's advocating for is unnatural, both because it allocates power systemically rather than organically, and is also based in limiting human potential. This is all going to come into play a little later on, but Dani doesn't see this for what it is. She argues, "No," I shake my head, "you're wrong. It's not like we'd all have the same powers. We'd all have something unique that we can do. We could let people pick what they want, be whatever they choose. We don't have to wait for the nemesis to do it naturally. We can do it right now. Look, I absolutely want to be your spokeswoman, okay? Of course I do. This is huge. But if we're going to do this, we need to do it for everybody." She thinks that he's being short-sighted when he's actually being manipulative. Part 2, distributing resources. In order to better be able to convince Dani, Garrison brings in one of the superheroes he's been working with, in order to share his plan from a superhero's point of view. "Dani, I think you've been in the game long enough to notice some of the problems with how superpowers currently work." I guess? I don't really know what you mean." "Well, for one, most people with powers are in the closet about it," says Thunderbolt. "It's all special ability this and peculiar talent that. They might use it for a job, or just to dig around, but they don't really get the most of it." But if this is an unlimited resource, which we've already learned is possible, then it's unnecessary to be economical with it and impossible to waste. Okay, for example, I've been told that I have a nice voice, an NPR radio voice, and I edit my own videos, and personally, I don't hear it, but have I wasted my voice by not training to be a singer or reading audiobooks or being a radio personality? I don't know. There are lots of people who can and do these things. Besides, I've been training pretty hard at other things, so while someone might comment in passing that I have a nice voice, I don't think that they would seriously make that argument. If everyone had superpowers, then any potential waste would be on that minuscule scale. But there's also the possibility that even that wouldn't be to his liking either. All the things that I can think to do with my voice, all the things that I can do good in the world anyway, are all jobs, and Thunderbolt is extremely dismissive of using your talents for a job. The fangirl blush fades a little. I guess I don't really see the problem. My job is super dangerous. Not everyone wants that kind of life. But you want it, don't you? Well, yeah, Newport kind of needed me. Even if I didn't like it, I'd probably still do it. But you do like it, don't you? It's okay to say you do. I love it, says Thunderbolt, putting a hand to his chest. And if someone wants to stay conventional and safe, they can do that. But isn't it kind of a waste for them to have their powers if that's what they want? That sounds off somehow, but it's hard to put my finger on why. I can't. Teacher, I can put my finger on why. Again, it's only a waste in a world where superpowers is a limited resource, and where we need everybody who has this resource to do all they can. But neither supposition is correct. Let's take a look at this idea with education for a moment. In Stephen King's It, Bill and George's mother went to Juilliard and uses her education to play piano in the living room. And I do think that this is a waste, but not because she's very talented and doesn't share her talents with the world. The skill and talent are hers to keep. That's fine. But the education is the limited resource, and Juilliard is the best music school. How many people would have done far more if given the same opportunity? Now, there are two solutions. Either you can limit who has access to education so that only the best and the brightest, the people who've already proven themselves, and the people that you think are going to make the most of the education can access it. That's the model that more or less we have going on today. Or you can create more opportunities so that when some inevitably get squandered, it's less of a loss. But in this example, I'm talking about skill and training. What if someone were to look into her living room and say, how dare she have such talent when I want so desperately to play on that level, yet no technical ability will ever make up for my lack of talent? And what if they were then able to siphon her talent, not her skill, not her training, her talent away from her into themselves? Now we're talking about something much more fundamentally belonging to a person. The array of characteristics, traits, talents, and other characteristics that make the person who they are. Imagine being able to decide that somebody else had wasted having really nice hair and that you could metaphysically take that attribute for yourself because you would make better use of it. Or what about the straight girls who think that a gay man's attractiveness is wasted on other men, and they could metaphysically take some of that attractiveness and put it towards somebody who would like them back? But Danny is a child. She mistakes this dark incentive for a much purer one. In fact, it sounds a lot like what I've asked myself when I saw people with their powers who were obviously more interested in blending in than standing out. So maybe I've never called it a waste, but still, why settle for normal when you can do the kinds of things that I can do? Hell, look at Calamity. She's barely superhuman and she's still way cooler than basically everyone else in the city. I guess. I mean, waste is a strong word, but you see what I mean, right? I think so. Well, what we're going to do is remove the random chance from who gets powers and who doesn't. Only people who want them and who've earned them will get them. Earned them how? The best people should have the best powers. No more supervillains and no more slackers. Slackers? This is an awfully efficiency-minded way of framing the issue after, might I remind you, dear watcher, showing that the limit of superpowers is a purely man-made one. The best way to eliminate waste would be to empower everyone. Alternatively, one might argue with no supervillains, who needs heroes? That's what Phase 1 is all about, and everything else flows from there. What's Phase 2? I ask. My trepidation grows. That's not ready to be revealed yet, says Garrison with an even look at Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt dips his head and moves away from the topic. Right now, there's no efficiency to how superpowers are allocated. And again, let's be clear on something. There doesn't have to be. Everyone can have superpowers. In terms of maximum efficiency, it's best if everyone can operate at the maximum level. The idea that superpowers are limited and should be distributed is a purely human construction. But there's a corollary, too, when it comes to efficiency. Efficient for whom? As the distributor of these superpowers, I'm sure Garrison has himself in mind. A market-based system would be vastly superior, and Richard already showed you how we're going to bring some creative disruption to that problem. See, market solutions, and remember, markets existed in pre-capitalist societies and do exist in non-capitalist societies, look a lot better when you control the market. But more important is what it means for the wider world. There's a lot wrong with the world these days. We're at, what did you call it, Rich? An inflection point in history, says Garrison. He sips his soda. Right, the old world is rotting. There are too many problems that are going unaddressed because of special interests and small-minded politicians. That's an interesting use of words right there. Special interests. Usually when we talk about special interests, we're talking about individuals and corporations who can pay the government in order to have their interests taken into special consideration where others go without. People who can pay the government to have more and more. People like Garrison. But he's flipped the script. The way he uses it, special interest refers to anybody who needs more than average from the government. And because we're primed to dislike special interests, The rhetorical trick works. And it's not just in government. The West's culture is sick too. Flabby mediocrity is the order of the day. We're raising generation after generation to believe the worst thing you can do to someone is offend them. But that literally doesn't follow. It sounds like a throwaway line, like he's had this chip on his shoulder for a while, but the people who complain about offense are usually the people who want to say some really heinous stuff, or are the kind of person who can't take it when it's dished at them. We're told to pretend that everyone is equal, but excuse me, some of us can fly. Excellence isn't celebrated anymore, and it's suffocating humanity. Political equality isn't the same as suggesting that everyone is literally identical. I might just as easily say, we're told to pretend that everyone's the same, but excuse me, some of us have graduate degrees. See, it doesn't follow. I'm not more human or more of a citizen because of my education. I mean, maybe supervillains would think so. They're always flouting their education. Also, what are you talking about? You are literally paid to do superhero work. Millions of people know your name. Garrison chimes in. I started homeschooling my daughter because the other students were taught it was okay to shame her for using her powers. They got scared because she can do things they can't, and so they expect her to stifle herself simply because of their cowardice. I have some questions about what exactly she was doing. We've already seen she can be a bit of a brat. I wouldn't be surprised if she was harassing or even bullying the other students. I wonder if the teachers didn't say something to her like, they're not including you in their games because they're afraid of you. Have you considered trying to blend in? And this was at a so-called elite academy in Zurich. It's like that all over now. The way he says this makes me think he's voiced this complaint before. A lot. There's no escape. Someone does something outstanding and they get shouted down for not being fair to the people who can't. And that's a very interesting point he's making. Remember, his entire plan hinges on taking from those who can, the superpowered, and giving to those who cannot. Right, says Thunderbolt, and that's who they care about, the people who can't. There's no concern anymore for the people who can, the people who do. They've murdered the meritocracy. No civilization can thrive if it insists on strangling its best members. And how does this plan differ? By his own standards, this plan is much worse. It not only seeks to take away power from the best and the brightest and to give away that power to those who can't, but also seeks to limit the power's resource for everyone. You can just as easily say that no civilization can thrive when it insists on limiting human potential. And it's true. Civilizations that invest in their citizenry do better than those which don't. We can take the best lessons of history and abandon the failed ideologies that got us here. My enthusiasm has completely drained away. This conversation has more red flags than the Chinese embassy. Cecilia's media training is in full effect, and I crack a soda of my own to cover my unease. After a sip, I ask, which ideologies are those? Garrison and Thunderbolt trade a look. It seems to say, well, it's now or never. Thunderbolt looks at me and says, democracy. That's the moment I realize that a supervillain has literally sat me down in his lair so he and his buddy can explain their evil plan over drinks. Here's the thing. Most Americans get that democracy is good, but they don't know why it's good. It's kind of dogmatic, actually, the way that they believe in democracy, and I don't blame them. It's how we're taught. We understand that democracy is good, voting is good, the will of the people is good, but most people can't even differentiate between a mode of governing and location on a political spectrum. For example, I've been told that socialism is undemocratic or fascism is undemocratic, but what happens when you vote those systems into being? Democracy isn't a set of policies, it's just a procedure where the majority rules. You can vote for any set of policies, and by virtue of the voting, those policies are democratic. But without a thorough understanding of why democracy is good, Danny can't articulate why these ideas are hitting her wrong until she's shown the conclusion. She can't point out the rhetorical flourishes, the contradictions, or the beginnings of anti-democratic logic. When you get right down to it, I'm willing to bet that she wouldn't be able to articulate why democracy is better, just that it is. And part of this is that she's a literal child, but the other part of it is that Americans don't understand why democracy is good. I've spoken to tens of thousands of people about why democracy is good, and with thousands of them. I would estimate that the percentage of people who really get it is in the low single digits. People come to the United States Capitol for the same reason they go to palaces and cathedrals. Artistically and architecturally, it's impressive. And people latch on to this surface element rather than engaging with the deeper questions of why democracy matters, why individual rights matter. They, like Danny, would sit with a supervillain and hear them out because they wouldn't know where the logic was taking them or how to argue back. They would be caught by surprise when the conclusion was to roll back democracy and individual rights when it shouldn't have been a surprise at all. We need to stop letting ourselves be caught off guard, and to do this, we have to understand the underlying value of things like free speech, democracy, and individual rights. When we understand the underpinnings of these ideas, we can spot when people are trying to roll them back, rhetorically, socially, culturally, politically, legally. If we can spot these things early, then we can nip that work in the bud and protect our rights. But if we don't, then every time we will give them the benefit of the doubt until it is too late to do anything but protest. So as my final return to Richard Garrison, we're trying to create a new society here on Cynosure, says Garrison. We'll be a model to the rest of the world, combining the best in modern thinking with the most timeless and enduring human wisdom. Like what, I ask? I think Thunderbolt is tweaking to the fact that they haven't made the sale, but Garrison is still so euphoric after coming out of the closet as a fascist lunatic that he answers without hesitation. Hereditary dictatorship. It's the oldest form of government and, when left alone, the most stable. Do you notice how he puts his thumb on the scale? When left alone, it's the most stable. Well, leave any system alone and it'll be pretty stable. For a very basic counterexample, it's really hard to tell whether socialist and communist governments are viable because when we're not toppling democratically elected governments, we're putting economic sanctions on them. We've literally never left them alone long enough to let them fail or succeed on their own merits. We'll have the best and the brightest living in luxury, not just here, but in seasteads all over the planet. Again, this doesn't follow. Many dynasties have ended because the children of great kings are not themselves great kings. Maybe it's easier to pass your kingdom to your child because they've lived their whole life in the palace or whatever, but easy is not the same as merit. What happens when, in a generation or two, mediocre people are inheriting power and geniuses are being born into poverty? Hierarchy is natural. It's healthy. Again, yes, but the hierarchy that he is suggesting is not a natural one. It's one that you have to construct and maintain. Why do you think people love hearing stories about kings and queens so much? Because they imagine themselves on top. Nobody looks back and wants to freeze in a muddy little hut, but that's how most people lived. They're yearning for the past. They want to pay us tribute. Aristocracy means rule by excellence, and that's what we'll be. Again, even if we buy into this premise, picking excellent people of one generation and then passing the mantle to the next generation isn't going to achieve the results he wants. Inheritable rule is not a meritocracy. It's the opposite of a meritocracy. Now he thinks he has an answer. The excellent, trained from birth to excel, leading the mundane. But this just opens up even more problems. First, if education is what makes someone excellent, then it is that and not their heredity that makes them excellent. This is the bell curve argument. And remember when he said that people would be granted superpowers based on their having earned it? Well, he switched his argument in an attempt to tip the scales and make sure that certain families are always on top. You need to be able to catch these switches when they happen. Rhetorically, it happens more often than you'd think. But since we've changed topics, let's examine, too, the idea that you can train someone to be excellent. If this is possible, then everyone can and should be trained to be excellent. There's no reason not to educate everybody this way. Any society would be improved by being made entirely of Übermensch. Unlocking this potential doesn't just improve individual lives either. Imagine the literature, science, medicine, etc. that would be the result of this kind of education. You know, I saw a post a while back that read, "What if the cure for cancer was stuck in the head of somebody who was never given a chance?" And to be honest, I see all education that way, and it's not just the industrial argument either. It's also the philosophical fact that I like being around educated people. It's nice to be surrounded by people who are thoughtful about things. Anyway, by ceding this point, Garrison admits that the difference in the successes of children of wealthy families and the children of poorer families comes down to environment. Because environments play such a large role in facilitating abilities and successes, children from poorer families will always have more untapped potential on average than children from wealthier families. Their environments allowed and encouraged their potential to be unlocked early and often. Consider the waste and inefficiency of a social system like that. Second, this raises some very real, very important questions about who's going to be responsible for this education. Because try as we might to educate our students in some benign philosophical sense, there's always going to be some element of cultural baggage that they pick up on and internalize. And these things can turn around and have some very real political implications. For example, and I literally had to leave this country and sit in a foreign classroom to really get an idea of how much of education is really indoctrination, British students say some buck wild racist stuff. You know, the US gets a lot of flack for racism, and it's earned, but all that had me thinking that the US was the worst, most racist country in the history of the world, and that's just not true. I knew people who in 2015 were in a liberal arts university and argued that Rudyard Kipling did nothing wrong. So there are some very real consequences for decisions like what will they learn and how will the students be selected. Well, we all know how the students are going to be selected. Heredity. If the parents were excellent on their own merit, then the children will be educated to be excellent. But if heredity was all they needed, then why do they need this special education? It seems like these excellent parents aren't too confident in the excellence of their children after all. Maybe we should circle back and re-examine some of those peers who might be a better match for this program. But even this wouldn't entirely follow. Education isn't a limited resource. Or at least it doesn't have to be. They could open up these elite academies everywhere and fund them publicly so that every child can reach their full potential. It's the same argument that Danny made about superpowers. If it's possible for everyone to have them, then the most efficient thing to do would be to ensure that everybody was able to fulfill that full potential. Alright, so the thing happened to me that seems to happen to all YouTubers eventually, which is that my camera just stopped recording and I didn't get my whole conclusion the first go. So editing Chloe is here to carry the torch to the finish line. When I first started explaining the concept for this video to people, it came off a little quaint. It's about how to stop a supervillain before it's too late. And while that's certainly true, there are a few nuances that need unpacking. First, this is a story, not a debate, and stories need dramatic tension. And I don't blame Danny for not being able to argue against this guy. Not only is she fictional, she's also 15. I certainly wouldn't expect more from a literal child. Second, when I say supervillains, what I really mean is their real-world analog, the reason why these stories exist, the reason why the readers find them so compelling. Once you put your finger on the anxiety that a story plays on, you can trace that back to the society where real work needs to be done. So a guide for spotting supervillains is really a guide for figuring out where ideas are going before you stake your whole identity on something that's either personally harmful or a detriment to society. And third, when I say too late, I'm referring to the fact that most conversations are held in front of an audience of some sort. Family gathering, debate theater, television, the classroom. You need to be aware in any of these situations that you're on a stage, you're being watched. The conversation isn't just between you and your opponent. You don't need to win them over. What you need to do is poke holes in their rhetoric in a way that the audience will find convincing. If you let them explain their entire ideology unchallenged in a charismatic way, you lose. If you have a vague sense that they're wrong and can't substantiate a rebuttal, you lose. It's that simple. What April Daniels shows us is that you can be well-educated, well-spoken, charismatic, charming, and still be a supervillain. She takes us down a twisted logical path that can be hard to recognize as a path to tyranny, showing us that we need to be vigilant when we hear these arguments. My video adds to this work, showing the kinds of things that you can say when supervillains come up in real life. So get to know their rhetoric, learn the rhetorical tricks they use, and practice spotting logical inconsistencies. The road ahead is meandering and dark, and it's essential that we take it in the right direction. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you enjoy the kind of content that I make, don't forget to like and subscribe. Most of the content I make on this channel either has to do with literature or history, but I make a few other kinds as well. I'd like to say a special thanks to my supporters on Ko-fi. If you enjoy my work and you want to support, the link to do that is down in the description below. And in the comments below, tell me about a time that you were someone's superhero, and tell me what that superpower you used was.